I am bringing you this very brief update of what's going on with the whole situation of life during wartime in Israel. And the reason I'm doing that is because I think it's important for people to know, especially if you're not familiar with the situation in that part of the world, is that generally speaking, life goes on. And as much as there is, a measure of fear and uncertainty when you have a bunch of invaders running around, territory in a country that people have to defend because they don't have a choice, because it's the only place that they have to call home, that it makes for some rather interesting events, both civilian and government-wise and pretty much every other way. And we see already, for example, the government and military response, which is to be, which is kind of as usual, right? They're going to do what they're supposed to do because that's their duty, that's their job, that's what they get paid for. Ultimately, that's their kind of main calling. Whether one agrees with it or not is not the issue. The point is they will perform that job above all others because that's kind of the thing that, is sort of their main purpose in any country. And when they're fighting people who don't observe any kind of, rules of combat, people who on purpose target innocent civilians and do unspeakable acts to them when they're alive and when they're dead. It's a very difficult situation to combat that kind of opponent or enemy, but it's something that a country like Israel unfortunately specializes in doing. And I say unfortunately because obviously it would be better if there were no such conflicts. But, we live in a world in which those conflicts do exist. So, life during wartime is basically kind of, you try to, keep calm and carry on, as the Brits say, back in the day, they would anyway, during World War II. And to not let it stop you from doing your normal routine life. Because if you do that, then as, George W. Bush once said, at the start of the whole war on terror thing, is, if you change your course of everyday life, not because you have to, but because you feel, like fear or panic, then you basically let the bad guys win. And so it's important to, as much as possible, maintain a routine function of operations and change as little as possible from that. Of course, make changes where necessary, especially for safety and whatever, but not to upend your entire life unless it's absolutely necessary to do so for your safety or whatever you need to carry forward. So, keep that in mind, that it is not an easy situation for anyone to live through, and that the most important thing for anybody living under wartime is, in fact, to do as much of the normal routines as possible, because that ensures that basically the good guys win as much as possible by not surrendering their life and the way they live, by doing basically what the bad guys want, which is to not carry on with the normal functioning of affairs. So, that said, I just wanted to bring that to your attention and to make sure you knew that if you happen to be in one of those affected areas and you've never been in such an affected area before, that there is in fact life during wartime, and it does in fact carry on. And if you're in a place like Israel right now and you've never been in an active war zone or anything like that, even if you feel like you're in a crazy area, like in the center of the country where there's a lot of rocket fire and some attacks in, settlements and villages, that you stay as much, first of all, up to date on the relevant information about your environment. So always be what's, special forces and other emergency groups always call be situationally aware, meaning be aware of your surroundings, immediate and middle distance and long distance, so that you are not caught off guard no matter what happens, so that you see it coming and you can do whatever you can to stay safe. And apart from that, it's important to stay functioning normally as much as possible. And I say that because really it's not only good for your general well-being in terms of probabilistically and statistically, you're better off carrying on than trying to redefine your entire life. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that you can't leave a war zone if you have the ability to, and you don't feel particularly, the need to stick around. Right? Maybe you have special needs that you need to take care of, and that you can't be around a war zone because that would totally interfere, with that ability to do that. And there's a huge number of cases in which, getting out of the danger zone is probably the wisest thing to do. But there's also a lot of people who just can't. And in that case, the best thing to do is to be situationally aware, generally not change the course of your daily routine, other than when you need to for security reasons. And if you do need help, if you're a foreigner in a war zone, make sure you know how to reach your embassy. Make sure you have that number on speed dial or whatever you have to on your phone. Make sure that any apps you have on your phone or your computer are all secured, because cyber attacks are frequent and only becoming more frequent. There's any number of reasons to keep your assets secured as much as you can without being paranoid, but being realistic and thinking, okay, if you're close to the field of combat, how should you operate so that you don't put yourself in any increased risk position? And if you're, obviously if you're a combatant, that's a very different story. There's a whole set of chain of command and protocols and everything else that combatants have to do. Soldiers and police and rescue and security services, you name it, right? Those are all very different, right, in terms of what they need to do, and they're professionally trained to do that. But if you're not professionally trained to do that, or if you're not in active duty since a long time, or if you're not in reserve duty, then what you need to do is take reasonable steps to keep yourself safe and to continue doing what you normally do as much as possible. And if you don't need to increase your risk exposure, your risk vectors for any particular reason, then you shouldn't. But does that mean you can't volunteer to help with the greater cause if you're so motivated to do so? Of course it doesn't mean that. There's, for example, in Israel, plenty of civilians who are, gathering supplies and other things necessary, and donating supplies, donating vehicles, donating weapons, even putting together self-defense groups that are, going around and doing extra work that the army just, is going to take a bit longer to respond to. That civilian groups of well-trained reservists people who've been on active duty in special forces, etc. They know how to handle these things in a professional way. And those are some things that can be done by civilians and are being done by civilians in places like Israel. Should you join one of those groups? Probably not, unless you know what you're doing. Unless you're actually a professionally trained combatant and you have experience and you're physically fit and mentally fit and have all the resources you need to do it and can stay safe and everything else. It's generally not a good idea to enter a battlefield willingly unless you actually know what you're doing. And if you're suddenly caught in a battlefield and you're not a professional combatant, the best thing to do is to get out as quickly as possible. And what is a battlefield? Well, when you're fighting irregular enemies like terrorist groups, the battlefield is anywhere they happen to be, right? They're not literally going on an open field and volleying cannons at, much better equipped armed forces, right? They're raiding houses in little villages. They're looking for soft spots. They're looking for, whatever it might be, shopping malls or whatever they can attack, anything that they can cause damage, harm people, capture people, kill people, whatever it is. They're doing all of the awful things. That's kind of the whole point of the whole terrorism thing, is it's basically a lot of psychological warfare by causing damage, but causing fear and panic more than anything. Because yes, the damage is real. Yes, the murders are real. Yes, the injuries are real. Yes, the kidnappings are real. Yes, the rapings are real. Yes, all the awful things they're doing are real, right? But, and not to belittle the numbers at all, because the numbers in Israel are horrifyingly high compared to other conflicts Israel has fought before. Since like 1973, Israel hasn't seen anything like this. And if you were to compare it to 9/11, it's many times the damage statistically, proportionally per capita, what happened to Israel and what happened to the US. Anyway, so stay safe. Don't do anything rash. Try to keep yourself level-headed and, operating normally as much as possible, and change course when you need to for safety reasons. Anyway, that's it for now. Talk to you later. Bye.